Okay, we are recording, and yes, we are. Good morning, farmer. It's my pleasure to be with you here this morning. And my name is Dave Myers. I'm an extension educator in Anne Arundel County, and we've got Brad Pegleg behind the scenes there as co-host and doing everything well. And Shannon, she's joined us. She's been a previous guest host here, and maybe in the future she'll have I don't know, Shannon, are you thinking about a future webinar in March or April? But
yeah, possibly. And okay. I just last year I really enjoyed the discussion that everyone had, so I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Great to see Malcolm, Renee, Russell. Great to also see you here this morning, and others that hopefully join us here. We'll get this session recording. And what I wanted to talk about was, well, of course, we all know that we're a part of the government, and with the University of Maryland Extension, your local government, your state government at work, and we always want to make sure that we're open and fair with everyone. And everyone feels that we've been fair and open with them. Excuse me, I hope my voice holds up here. Oh, here we go. It's gone away. You're run away with me. No tillage. Boy, that's something really dear to my heart. And so it's kind of some topics that I wanted to bring with you here with Good Morning Farmer. And I just want to go kind of a history lesson of no tillage, if you will allow me to go down a little road to journey with no till with you. And see how relevant, and if maybe even ask the question, is it still relevant today as it was? And so again, it's great to have you join us here this morning. Of course, has a nice picture there of the no-till planner, of course, my name there, and the office and extension office. And actually, interesting enough, my extension office is actually at the Naval Academy Dairy Farm property, where I actually worked for 18 years and was part of this no-till revolution. So that's why it's kind of a personal journey with you this morning, but I think an important one. So welcome again. Good morning, farmer. Let's talk about no-tillage and kind of this revolution. My favorite book is this book written by Mr. Faulkner called Plowman's Folly. And, we take a look at the resources of this earth, and there's two maps that I have there. And of course, there's someone working a nice field there, and looks like a grain drill running across to probably plant wheat ground out in the Great Plains. And you can see that that's not in the air, that picture. And you can see that the got two maps. One's global population density. What's interesting now, that's 1994. I put this particular slide together back about 1998. Now it's still pretty relevant, I think, because you can look at the global density and you can see the colors there as we march around the globe in populated areas. And you can look at our East Coast and you can think that's 94. How much more red and magenta is it now along the East and West Coast and down through, kind of the center there of the U.S., which is the real production area of the U.S. And then you look over and you see how rapidly we've populated, the older areas of civilization around the globe. And then you realize the New World's getting gobbled up too. And it's not coincidence when we look at a soil carbon map, this map over here with the green in it, that the areas where you have soil carbon is where you can sustain those populations. And so it's really important and vital for us to protect that soil. It's not a fountain of wealth forever. And the Plowman's Folly, I think Mr. Faulkner was the first one to recognize that. He was an extension agent. Edward Faulkner was an extension agent doing the Dust Bowl when he wrote Plowman's Folly. And I guess you could see why when you look at some of those horrific pictures of that Dust Bowl era. You realize that was a fairly small area in the U.S., but the impact of that Dust Bowl was felt all the way out to the Bahamas. They had dust covering things half inch to inch deep, and from clouds of dust to come out of our prairie there. And it was a kind of a sobering era, I think, for soil conservation. And of course, maybe it's not the rain that we worry about. Tropical Storm Hannah set on us a few years back and dumped about 6 inches in one morning. And so we know that erosion, both wind and water erosion can be severe, especially if we have plowed and open ground. And still we know exactly when the plowing campaign starts. We're released within a week of the plowing campaign in China for all their tillage by the dust that comes across all the way across the Pacific and lands in our coast, our West Coast. So we're still doing quite a bit of damage, I think, to our soils by continuing this tillage. Of course, this is what erosion looks like. It's typically not very pretty. We do our best, but we get channelized erosion. We get real erosion, different types of erosion that's eroding away our soils. And then so So out of that Dust Bowl, Edward Faulkner wrote Plowman's Folly. He became kind of my hero, and a lot of other people too that really got involved in no-tillage. And in his book, he challenged the agricultural scientists to disprove his statement or accept it that no one has ever advanced a scientific reason for plowing. And his insight gave rise to the reduced tillage error. Now, the interesting thing about Edward Faulkner is that when he wrote this book, there was no herbicides. And so all they had was tillage to control weeds, right? So they had to clean till, and their planters were such that they had to essentially plant in a clean tilled field. And so it was very difficult to think any other way than to turn the soil, work the soil. And he said his treatise in this book was that we only need to till the very least minimal zone of the top of the soil that allows us to control the weeds. And so he really was against, and for good reasons, against deep tillage. And so he really was the father of kind of the reduced tillage. You know, this interesting report, you know, you'll see these kind of reports, and this was in Mother Jones. It's looking about how are we going to stop these kind of scary vanishing gullies of soil loss out in, you know, if they're talking about in Iowa, you can only imagine we should be talking about it here too. And so for a long time, we thought as agronomists that we could sustain about 6 tons of soil loss per acre. And if we did that, all right, remember, keep your mics muted, at least during this recorded portion. We'll get into discussion in a few minutes. The Mother Jones article here, 6 tons is a kind of allowable. That was kind of the rule of thumb that the early soil scientists thought was what they could recommend as a minimum or maximum amount of soil loss. And so, but really new science is saying now that we don't generate soil as fast as we thought we did. And we don't add, you know, we're reducing as much as 1 to maybe even 1 to 2 tons of loss per acre would be too much to be replaced by normal cropping systems. And so again, that's kind of sobering too. That shows us even more, I think, how important no-tillage is. So what is no-tillage? Let's kind of talk about how it got. I wrote a little kind of a chronicle of Maryland's no-till chronicle here with some players that I'm aware of in Maryland. Of course, we can say every neighborhood had similar players because no-till got its start in Kentucky. And of course, that time I was actually farming at the Naval Academy Dairy Farm, started there in 1980 and farmed through 1997. And we were very much in the throes of adopting this and right in this no-tillage revolution. So the very tenure that I had at the farm, we were doing reduced tillage and even still doing moldboard plowing. And by the time I was 10 years into that, we accepted that we were going to be zero till and 100% no-tillers. And that just didn't happen, you know, easily. So no-tillage is a cropping system, and this is my definition. It's a cropping system which combines cover crops, herbicides, residue management, and precision seed placement. And so again, it takes out a lot of those tillage steps that we might have to be required to get a clean till. And typically when I think about that, that's one pass with the plow or a chisel or a heavy offset disc, and at least 3 or 4 passes with a disc, and then another pass with a disc and a roller to get a seed bed. So it's a lot more, tillage is a lot more. And then if you're going to knock on these herbicides, then you have to put in about 6 cultivations. And so again, tillage is very extensive and very damaging. So here's the first picture of one of the pictures I took of the Navy Dairy Farm years back, when we were 100% what I would call zero tiller in every field at that point. One thing you'll notice, and when we talk about, go back to this picture here, you can see that there's 88 crop strips. So having cropping system means rotations and rotating crops and adjacent crops. So you always have typically something green protecting those slopes as much as possible. And then as soon as the crop comes off, in this case, you see the corn stalks with a rye cover right back in it. And so you can see this idea that there's no exposed soil, that you got something, the crop or something, or cover crop, something's being replaced in these strips to keep a very, very vibrant rotation. And these rotations are very beautiful as we look at the picture here from NRCS across the landscapes of kind of putting in contour strips and strip cropping and cover crops. And of course, your main crops are rotated into that too. And it is beautiful. No-till is amazing, has been amazing systems. And of course, we'll talk here now about how we got to this. How did we get to this? Well, Mr. Harry Young was our what we call our Mr. No-till. And he was in 1961. That was the year I was born. It's hard to imagine that. He was in Herndon, Kentucky, and he would work with the extension in Kentucky and was really interested in this idea, concept of no-till in 1961 now. So the father of no-till in Kentucky. And it's interesting enough that the main players at the time, Kentucky was #1, but Indiana and Maryland and Virginia and Ohio really jumped in. They were in West Virginia to a little bit too, to some degree. And so they really were, these were the players in no-till in the world. This was started here in Kentucky and real quickly adopted by those states that had challenging slopes. And of course, Southern Maryland's not flat we're not Eastern Shore. And of course, up into the Western Shores, it's much more rolly, hilly, a lot of erosion has occurred. In 1943, Edward Faulkner wrote a book, The Plowman's Folly, we talked about. And of course, Hugh Hammond Bennett was the founder of Soil Erosion Service at that time, which became the Soil Conservation District Service, and then NRCS as we know it now today. But that started too right out of the Dust Bowl and became the father of soil conservation. So these minds were coming together to start thinking about how we were going to get to this concept of not plowing and just tillage enough to get the seed in the ground. During 1950s, 1960s, the plow lost ground to the chisel plow, the disc, and heavy offset disc and cultivars. And we also started to get some herbicides to come into the scene, which allowed us then to kind of do what we might call chemical tillage, right? We actually control the weeds, and then we have selectivity to the crop. So that we start to see these early. The first herbicide was I have a picture of early advertisement of 2,4-D as Weedone, and it really was a dandelion killer. But quickly they recognized that corn has tolerance. It's a broadleaf only herbicide, plant growth regulator type. It came out in 1940 out of the Templeton PPL company and was first sold in the U.S. under American Chemical Paint Company, AmChem, in 1945. It was used in 1944, 1945. It was used on the White House lawn for dandelion control. And President Wilson was really touting that if you look back in the historical documents. So also 1954, paraquat came on the scene, but it didn't come to the US until 1962. So even when Mr. Young started no-till, he didn't have paraquat, which is our burn down chemical, right? And then Geigy Company had Atrex and Princep in 656. So he had Atrex, Princep, and 2,4-D as his first no-till experiments. But quickly, paraquat came into the scene, and we used that then as our burn down chemical for our weed control of the living covers and things and weeds that were present. So we really had, by the mid 60s, we had, and then Monsanto brought in lasso at the end. So by 1970, we really had a really good way of no-tilling corn from a chemical approach. And actually the lasso could be used on beans too. And they came up with another product called metribuzine. So we had a bean control program as early as the 70s. And Monsanto developed Roundup in 1970, but it really didn't get marketed until about 1974. So it also became the burn down chemical. But actually we used more paraquat at that time. In 1966, Alice Chalmers came out with the first no-till planter. And it had the flutes and the openers, disc openers, with the ability to finally go through residues and cover crops and put seed. The real problems, probably some of the most hindrance, was not the weed science from the herbicide perspective, but placement of seed in no-till systems very uniformly. And so planter technology had not caught up yet. But 1966, we had our first attempt from Alice Chalmers. In 1968, Mr. Bill Tidings, a superintendent at Naval Academy Dairy Farm, brought an old one of these Alice Chalmers planters. And in fact, I had a chance to actually use it several times to go back, and it was great for going back and replanting corn. And so I used the old 1968 Alice Chalmers planter at the Naval Academy property, long after we had Max Emerge and Kinsey type planters. And it was interesting, Mr. George was the crops master at that time. He couldn't accept it, he couldn't adapt to the no-till. So it wasn't easy for farmers. they, to give up clean till practices, and Mr. George had to retire as crops master. And Mr. Brenneman, Orville Brenneman, who became the predecessor of the crops master before I was, took charge. And he was really into no-till, I'll tell you. Learned a lot from Orville. And we had paraquat 8-Trex last 2,4-D. We could do it now. We could plant. We had a planter. We were doing it. And by the time I got there, we had a John Deere conservation planter and a no-till planter. And so we really were. And not only that, our drills were still lacking though. We didn't get our no-till drill until that I thought was very successful until 1989 when we got the John Deere 750. We finally had a drill that had the same type of technology that the planters for placement through heavy residues. But we really took a lot of pride in this farming ugly. If you were back there, we had great conferences, no-till conferences. It wasn't uncommon to go down to Salisbury, to the big convention center down there, to have a no-till conference of 400 plus people. Go up to Hagerstown to have a couple hundred, 250 people at a big conference up there, up into Pennsylvania with Lynn Hoffman, the big groups up the York Fair Center or Harrisburg Expo Center. Just huge crowds. No-till was just incredible at this time in the 80s. And it was really a lot of fun being part of it. We got through the 1990s, we really perfected the equipment technology. And even then we got in the mid 90s, we got into Roundup Ready technology. And so again, US farmers were modeled worldwide. We were, in fact, I made several trips into the Soviet Union to work with no-till farmers and help them with no-till practices in Mongolia and down in Belarus, down into Kazakhstan. Just really amazing places to help. The interest was just incredible and still is in no-till. We got into integrated pest management and very prescriptive pest control tactics also during this era too, which I think people had a lot of pride in. And the modern no-till machinery era was the Kinsey brothers that developed the planter that John Deere and a lot of others have adopted with the gauge wheel technology. And of course, also the Yetter was my favorite row cleaner technology. I tried a lot of different row cleaners, and until Yetter learned how to perfect it, we had troubles with wrapping. And of course, even no-till drill is now perfected. So the only thing I can see is over the horizon is that the genetic technology, would it be nice to have a perennial corn? Of course, the seed companies, remember, I was a decob dealer for a number of years. And, we like to be able to sell you seed every year, but it would be nice if we had a perennial wheat and a perennial with a soybean with an alfalfa root. And, if I had my dream crops, I could really dream up some really nice crops for us that we didn't have to go out and plant all the time. We just go out and harvest, then we wouldn't have to do all this planting. And actually, when the planting, here, just give you some pictures here of no-till in practice. No-tilling corn with Yetter row cleaners, you can actually see you get like a zone tillage there. In fact, you're actually tilling about 12%. So I consider that strategically tilled area, just so you can basically have that seedling, just exactly put that seed exactly where you want it, sweep that residue and cover crop away with the Yetter row cleaners. And then of course that planter has capability of putting that seed precisely where you want it. Not only that, give it a little bit of fertilizer and maybe an insecticide, whatever it needs to make sure it has a kind of a protected start. Of course, we come over and blanket that whole field with herbicides, and then we have weed control that's extraordinary. And it's just, to me, it's just a fairly simple system. And with all the benefits of the cover crops and things. You can see here, this is the Yetter. This is finally when Yetter perfected this picture I took years ago. The coulter has to be integral to the row cleaner. A row cleaner without that coulter integrated into it will always wrap. Also, what Yetter did was they came out with a bearing hubs, so there was nothing for it to catch on that in those inner bearings. And so again, that was perfection. And that just didn't happen overnight. But once it happened, boy, my goodness, we can go through vetch now and not have to wrap, and all the cover crops that would not wrap. So this is a picture I took 1992, what I consider zero till. We'd already been in about 3 years of no tillage, and not just no tillage, but no tilling at all across the whole farm. And for an operating dairy, that's I think kind of a feat to be proud of, especially when you have lands that do erode quite readily on these silt loam soils. are highly prone, and we got more hills there than you might imagine in those fields. This is my first no-till alfalfa field, and that was because of that new John Deere 750 drill. Finally could get precise seed placement 1/8 of an inch in the soil, covered and packed, and that's the results of that. Here's just an example of the strip tilling at the dairy farm in 1992 when we were under zero till, and you can see the no-till rows down through that corn there in that alfalfa field. Alfalfa, and then you see the barley over there on the side yellowing down in spring of 92. Here's a picture going out with actually Roundup, actually taking alfalfa out. Some research I did at the farm from a master's degree, and was looking at no-till rotations of alfalfa in and out of corn and small grains. No-till and barley, so I sprayed it in the morning, a quart of Roundup, less than $10. Normally would have had to come in here and plowed and disced, and of course that hill there, we'd had erosion, and I'll be patching up the mud and all making all kinds of a mess trying to get barley established there. In this case, I just plant 1 quart of Roundup, come back in the afternoon, drill the barley, come back 4 weeks later. So you can see September 28th to October 28th, the alfalfa's gone, the barley's in place. And not only was it in place, come back, look at that field in March 1992, how beautiful it is, come back. And there's actually Orville in the combine there. So he was the crops master ahead of me at the Navy farm. I took his place as crops master and agronomist when he retired. And there's Orville in the combine. He was amazed. I was amazed. There I am a few years ago, getting that barley off. And Dr. Glenn, we were from University of Maryland, Scott Glenn, helped me weigh it out. And we had 119 bushels of barley with 0 nitrogen. So that nitrogen was captured from that previous alfalfa crop. So again, pretty amazing. No-till technology, no loss of soil, just pretty, we were pretty proud. Here's a 5-year stand of thinning alfalfa. And we go ahead and decide just to go ahead and just no-till, overseed it with orchard grass. There's that same stand. There it is close up. So again, went from that kind of thinning out alfalfa, 5-year stand, overseed it with orchard grass, and come right back into a beautiful stand of orchard grass and alfalfa for another couple years before we rotate out into corn. So it's pretty easy. It's spray and you plant, and then you come back and watch it grow and watch it grow. And so again, it's just a beautiful system. And these, of course, with the genetics now that we have, and of course you can do the same thing with beans, watch it grow and watch it grow, and eventually watch it grow to harvest. And so again, these systems were pretty easy to understand. As we watch the population continue to climb, I think we are actually maybe starting to bell curve a little bit here, and maybe who knows, maybe about 14 billion will plateau, which I'm not too concerned about. A lot of people are concerned about that, but I do believe we have the technology to meet that future population with no problem at all, if we do it with some of the techniques that we need to protect and build our soil. Dr. Lau, professor at Ohio State, of course, my colleague Ray Wall at the University of Maryland would say the same thing: increase no-till farming practices across the planet or face serious climate, soil quality, and food production problems in the next 20 to 50 years. He predicted that in 2004. It's certainly true. That's all we're talking about now, is rebuilding soil and soil health. And so again, it really is pretty amazing, a pretty amazing journey that we're on. I do believe that this new generation of agriculturalists are going to come up, Gen Ag. This came out of the CAST report several years ago, and I'm all, when I look at the science and I look at where we're moving, it is pretty fascinating. We'll need a generation of agriculturalists that'll rise up and meet the challenge. So here's one that I actually didn't spray. I actually planted it straight into millet with snap peas, because the millet senesces in the fall. I planted this August 20th, and actually watched it grow without even spraying. So some of these ideas of no-tilling without spraying and just using cover crops are pretty fascinating too. We'll see more growth in that area too. And there's sugar snap peas without any herbicides planted into a cover crop with those no-till planters. So again, a lot of things can be done. I've certainly spent a lot of time looking at no-tillage, not just in field crops, but vegetables and strip tillage and other type of sustainable approaches. And so I say, let's feed 14 billion and let's make sure we do it sustainably. We don't have no problem, as long as we remember to avoid the plowman's folly. Again, we'll be fine. And so to me, that's no-till. I was excited to be a part of it, still excited to be working with farmers that are embrace it and engage it. So again, let's go ahead. I guess the question for us today, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that, and we'll break back into our, here we go, stop share. I'm also going to stop the recording. And stop recording. There we go.